everybody, thanks for coming along. You've come to a session on how to choose a university abroad. Basically what that means is within the course of this session I'm going to try and encourage each and every last one of you to leave the country after you leave school. Now I'm guessing one or two of you might have already made thoughts in that direction anyway, hence your willingness to turn up and listen to this. But really what I'm going to talk about is not so much, whatever it is you want to do with your own lives, important though that is, but the actual process you'd have to go through. How would you make this happen? And the good news is that a lot of the things I'm going to tell you will already be familiar to you. The idea of choosing a university abroad in an ideal world should be exactly the same as choosing a university here. Now we all know there are going to be some added complications around money and visas and stuff like that, but let's put all that to one side for now, and we'll come back to it later. I'm not going to ignore it, but for now what I'd like to do is just make sure that you can consider international options exactly the same way as you would do your British ones. And what that really means, I suggest, is that when you first start thinking about where you want to go to university, one piece of advice above all other is probably important, and that is make sure you choose a university that's good for your particular subject. Don't just choose a university because you've heard of it, it's local, your parents liked it, or whatever else. Make sure it's actually good for the subject that you wish to study. And when you're looking for the best place for your subject, don't just artificially restrict yourself to what's available in the UK, because the reality is it might actually be somewhere altogether different. Now when you start looking at universities abroad and what they have to offer, they do have everything by now, I would go that far, but some things they have in bigger numbers than others. Some subjects are just easier to find to talk abroad, and the easiest of all is probably international business, because as Lewis puts it here, in order to get the most out of a course like that, you simply have to do it in a different country. I think we can all understand that going into a career in business these days is going to involve some kind of international exposure. And here are just a few examples of places that you could go to study business in English. I've got BI Norwegian Business School there, 2 in the Netherlands in Amsterdam and Groningen, and 1 in the Czech Republic in Prague. But before you think this is just for people who want to study really obvious subjects like that, I can promise you that for whatever niche it is that you're interested in, we can probably find something that suits you too. And here are a few examples. This first one is from the Netherlands. It's a degree in environmental sciences. This has been very popular with British students in recent years for 2 main reasons, I would argue. One is that Dutch universities are generally excellent around environmental issues. A lot of the research they're doing is known to be the best in the world. And also the style of education at many Dutch universities is much more project-based and hands-on, meaning that students really do feel that they are getting the skills they need to get a job straight after they leave university. So you put those 2 things together, and I think that this could be a compelling place to go and study. This next example takes a whole industry, if you like, these days, computer game design, and says if this is what you want to study, I would encourage you to leave the country. And the reasons why I say that is because, well, the industry itself is starting to leave the UK already. We all know there's this Brexit thing on the horizon, but the gaming industry has been quite explicit about it, and because 70% of people who work in that industry in the UK are from elsewhere in the EU, those jobs are going to leave the country. So if you want to work in this field, quite possibly you will have to as well. Aside from that, you could even go abroad purely because their quality of education is very good. NHTV Breda is another Dutch example. This is an award-winning university in the Netherlands. And DigiPen Institute of Technology, this is actually an American university with its headquarters just outside of Seattle, but they have campuses in Bilbao, in Spain, and in Singapore as well. And within the computer game industry, they are known as really being the Harvard of computer game education. So chances are you've never heard of it. To be honest, unless you're interested in this, there's no reason why you should have. But if you are, absolutely it should be there on your radar. And that's the kind of thing I hope you will start to see when you start researching your options abroad for particular niches. Now there is of course one other category of subjects that sees people want to go and study abroad, or want is probably the wrong word here, have to go and study abroad. Medicine, dentistry and veterinary medicine. I would say that roughly 70% of the time the phone rings in our office is for people who want one of these 3 subjects. And the reason why they're going abroad, well, quite obviously, it's because getting a place here is tough. Every year we will have people who get straight A's in every exam they've ever taken who end up without offers in the UK. And then what I would advise them to do is to think very seriously about whether they really want to go and study abroad. This choice is not for everybody. And if they do, and if they are determined to become a doctor or a vet or whatever, we can help. We will identify what would hopefully be good, sensible opportunities for you. And we send every year quite a few dentists now to Spain, medics to Italy and Cyprus, vets to Croatia and Spain as well. You do have some frankly frighteningly awful choices if you want to go into this area, so I would suggest you have to be careful, but do let us know and perhaps we can identify the right place for you. Now, having said all of that about choices of subjects, I am also, of course, acutely aware that when people do start to look at going to university abroad, more often than not, it's with a choice of destination in mind rather than subject. So it's quite common, for example, for us to hear things like, I want to go and study in America, or I want to go and live in France, could I actually use higher education to make that happen? Or maybe they've got an entirely personal motivation for why they want to go one place over another. We've had people say things like, I want to go mountain biking every day after class, which university's got the best trails on campus? Or, I want to take my horse to university, which university's got stables? And for example, I've had people talk to me for hours on end about Japanese universities, and I know full well, whenever I start in that conversation, sooner or later we're going to end up talking about anime and manga, no matter what it is they wish to study when they're at university there. And all of this is absolutely fine. I have no problem with any of that. Of course you should go somewhere that excites you. But what I do have to say is that these kind of reasons by themselves are not sufficient. You really do have to give consideration to the fact that if you're going to go and study in another country, it's going to be rather different to going to a university here. I'm not saying better or worse, that's for you to figure out. I am saying different. And what I'd like to do now is just explain one or two of these differences to you. Now, the best way I can actually illustrate difference is by spending a moment talking about one country that most people want to know about and think is quite similar to the UK. And that, of course, is the United States of America. We get a lot of people who want to go there for exactly the kind of reasons that Victoria gives here. Florida State University is really like the universities that you see in the movies. And it absolutely is, okay? You go and study there, you'll have the huge football team, you'll have all the clubs and societies, all things you might expect of American university life from having watched countless TV programs and films all about that very thing. But fortunately, Victoria did also consider what's written at the top half of this slide, where it says it's a different curriculum in the USA. This is massively important. Because I started off by saying your choice of subject is the most important thing. Actually, when it comes to America, it really isn't. You can actually go to an American university to study, I don't know, and you can write that on your application, undecided. It's just very, very different, because here in this country, and for those of you who have already researched British university options, you'll probably have picked up a university prospectus and had a look at it. And you will know that it's quite easy to work out if a university offers the subject you are interested in or not, because they will tell you, it will be written there in the prospectus. If you try and repeat that experiment with an American university prospectus, you will get precisely nowhere. And the reason why I say that is because American degrees are not like ours. They are not constructed around one or maybe two subjects on a joint honours degree. They are, if you like, constructed around one philosophy. And that could be described as the liberal arts. Now, what does that mean? It means that when you first go to an American university, they don't want you to specialise. They want you to explore all sorts of different areas of knowledge. It means that in the first and indeed probably the second year you are there, you won't be studying one or two things, you will be studying probably 8. And it will include maths, it will include a language, it will include arts, it will include sciences. Okay? So you will have to take basic classes in all of these kind of fields to fulfill what are called the general education requirements. Once you've done that, you can go on to specialise in different areas. But in America, true specialisation often doesn't happen until you go on to do a master's degree. So it's a very, very different system to what we have here. I'm not saying better or worse, just it's unlikely that both systems will suit you equally well. Now, the next thing that can be very different as well is the learning environment. Not every university teaches the same way. Not everyone offers the same kind of learning support. I can give you examples of some universities that we work with where in your first year you probably will find yourself in lectures with 800 other people. And you probably won't have any meaningful interaction with any of your professors or lecturers. They probably won't even know who you are. They probably actually won't even care until you get later into your degree. So in effect, you'll be completely anonymous at university, but if you're the kind of person who can study independently and pass exams, that might be just exactly what you need. At the other extreme, I can give you examples of universities where you'll be in much smaller classes and where you'll be on first-name terms with your lecturers from the first week you are there. This here is a photograph of the American University of Paris, where their average class size, their maximum class size is about 20. Within the usual class, there will be about 12 or 13 different nationalities represented. So it really is a very, very different experience from what you'd get at a British university or indeed at many other foreign universities. Now those are two obviously very extreme examples. The reality is most universities will combine both of those approaches, maybe have other differences as well. But you really do need to spend a little bit of time thinking about not just the curriculum, but also the environment at the university and whether or not you will be comfortable to go and study there. Okay? There you go. Anyway, so that's another difference. The next difference is actually massively important. But you might think, well, different exams, so what? You're going to have exams everywhere. Of course you're going to have exams at pretty much any university you think of going to. But from all the research we've done over any number of years, we have always found that this is actually the single biggest culture shock that British students report when they go to university abroad. But before I explain why, I will let Lewis explain his experience as well. Now Lewis is now studying business in the Netherlands. He's actually just about completed his third year at university. He's got one more year to go. He's originally from Morpeth, so he's gone from the northeast to the northeast of the Netherlands to do his degree. But this is him talking about his experience in the first few weeks in the first year. And he says, I was shocked by the intensity of the programme from the onset. You were required to keep up with all reading, exercises and attend all project meetings. I knew before I started I'd have to do this, however didn't realise the level of intensity. Basically what he's saying is that when he first arrived at university, he was a little bit surprised because they actually expected him to do some work, like straight away. And this does confuse British students because, to be honest, the first thing you're probably expecting to happen when you get to university here is, well, a week-long party called Freshers' Week, from which you can spend a while recovering before anything of serious academic consequence happens. Now, I am aware that is a slightly stereotypical, old-fashioned view of life at British universities. Students are much better behaved than they ever used to be. £9 a year fees will do that for you. But it's still fair to say that on many British university degrees, nothing you do at the beginning of your degree will have that much, if any, bearing on the classification you get at the end of the day. That just isn't true anywhere else that I've found. The more typical model is that midway through the first semester, which will be about 8 to 10 weeks after you arrive at university, you will have your first exams on the things you have studied so far. And you have to pass these exams. You'll get a few goes if you don't pass the first time. It's not all or nothing on the first attempt. But you have to pass those exams to gain the credit required to get your degree, and you have to pass them well if you want to get a good degree at the end of the day. So you really do have to hit the ground running and get stuck into your studies from the first moment you are there. Now, in the past, this caused all manner of problems for British students, and they used to always, seem to fail the first semester and have huge problems. That happens a lot less now. The message is getting through, but I can guarantee you, if you go abroad and you're speaking to your friends who stayed in the UK, it will be you that is working harder, faster. It does balance out, of course, across the years, and because these exams are coming around so regularly, you don't have these huge end-of-year final exams to worry about like you might have here in this country, but it is different and you need to be able to understand that. And if you don't, there are some pretty serious consequences, which I'm going to come back to a little bit later on. Because for now, I don't want to leave you with the impression that going to university abroad is just relentless slog. You are going to have time for a social life. And I would actually go so far as to suggest that this is the single most important slide in this entire presentation. Because, if I'm being honest, I reckon you can all get a pretty good degree in the UK. I think we have some decent universities in this country. I don't think there's any compelling reason why you must go abroad for purely academic reasons. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do believe if you investigate this thoroughly, you probably will find things that are better for you abroad. But I think the main reason why I would encourage you to go is because it will be a completely different experience. The things that you do, the people you meet, the places you go will all be completely different. And I think that this is the main learning experience involved in going to university abroad, not necessarily so much on the academic side. The reasons why I say this are primarily because it gives you an excellent opportunity to learn a lot more about the world in which you live, meet people who've been brought up with different values and different work ethics and so on. And to be able to cope with that and understand that is incredibly important. But even more important than that, I would suggest is I think it will give you a great opportunity to learn a lot more about what you are actually capable of yourself. Put yourself in a situation where you were foreign for a while, and I think you might surprise yourself as to what you can achieve. And I think these are tremendously important lessons that, I would encourage you to learn at some point in your life. Now obviously I am sharing from my own personal experience of having done this a couple of decades ago, but that is the main message that I would give you from my experience that I would want to share with you. But I am still talking about the ways in which universities are different, and this can have an impact on your social life as well. Okay, you've got to think, for example, about how well looked after you're going to be at university. For example, not every country has student support the same way as we do here. In some places, as an 18-year-old, you are expected to be an adult and will be treated as such, which means there won't really be much in the way of student support at all. But you will find other places that really will hold your hand the whole way through. So again, think about what kind of environment you want to be studying in. And then I suppose you've got to think about facilities that a university might have as well, most obviously around something like accommodation. This is a huge deal. Where are you going to live? At some American universities, indeed at a handful in the Netherlands these days, you will have to live on campus the whole time you are there. It's part of the deal. You are joining a community of scholars that doesn't just study together, it also lives together. But most other universities don't have campuses. They might not have halls of residence. If they do, they're probably quite different from what you're expecting here in this country. So you do have to investigate whether you'd be happy with where you'd be living. And then you need to think about, I suppose, clubs and societies and extracurricular activities, all the other things that go into making up university life. And here I guess the temptation is always to look for the university that has, well, everything. But I'm not strictly convinced that's necessary. I'll give you a couple of examples why not, both of which I've mentioned already. The first one is American University of Paris. They actually encourage their students to set up new clubs and societies. So if you can't see something in an area that you are interested in, as long as you can find 2 or 3 other people who share your interests, you might very well be able to go and set up your own club over there. And that could be a tremendous way for you to demonstrate leadership, for example. Now to give you another example, DigiPen that I mentioned in the north of Spain for computer game design. Their entire sporting facilities consist of one basketball hoop in the car park. That is literally it. But their students don't care. They've gone there to learn how to make video games. And when they're not making video games, they are largely playing video games. That is a fair comment. So they are totally okay in that kind of environment. Now for me, and I dare say for many of you, that might actually sound like hell on earth. But for some people, they're totally happy in that kind of environment. So I think what I'm saying now is just choose what's right for you. Don't assume that you absolutely need everything to be happy at university. Now I'd like to think that so far I've given you really, really good reasons for going to university abroad. What I'd like to do now though